Welcome to Under the Lens. Come and enjoy an extraordinary, raw, and unfiltered podcast that delivers debate, discussions, and interviews about film, pop culture, and everything in between. Here is your host, film critic and journalist, Byron Lafayette.
Welcome, everybody, to Under the Lens. I'm your host, Byron Lafayette. Today, I am joined by Shem Bitterman. Shem is an award-winning playwright and a film director, screenwriter, and producer. Today, he is going to be joining us to chat about his newest film, Distant Tales, and we'll also talk possibly a little bit about his connection to Hallmark if we have time. So it's really exciting conversation. So I think you guys are going to be enjoying it. And thanks, Shem, for joining us today on the program.
Yeah, welcome, Byron, and thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely very excited because, one thing that I was kind of thinking about, before this interview is like there's so many, titles in entertainment industry, there's writer, producer, director, all this. But I was thinking like, I think having the title of playwright is probably like one of the most coolest and prestigious titles to be able to say, like he's a playwright or I'm a playwright. So I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah, I think when you're a playwright, they tend to leave you alone just a little bit more. That's not what he sees a playwright. Don't mess with him. He's a playwright. Kind of like having a ninja sword. Oh, here comes the playwright. They talk about like stakes and obstacles and all that stuff. Intention. Forget that.
It's true. Goes back so far into history. I mean, you go back all the way to the Greeks.
Yeah. It's great. It's funny that you bring that up because I always think about oral storytelling. It's a funny kind of way, and podcasts kind of get back to that a little bit. Like many years ago, I was in Morocco, and I remember seeing a bunch of people gather, and there was like a barker, and he was collecting money, and of course it was all in Arabic. I didn't know what they were talking about, but then a little kid showed up in the middle of a circle. When they had gathered enough money, this kid just started telling a story.
How cool.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, now that's ancient. That goes back to Homeric times.
No, absolutely. Yeah, because it's very true. All stories were oral back then.
Yeah, and somehow we're slightly returning to it with podcasting and serial and things like that.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And especially you're seeing some of the even larger Hollywood names getting attached to some of these podcast stories. You've seen like Marvel's done them, and mystery thrillers and everything. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, what I like about it, and when we talk about my film, we'll talk about it a little too. But I like how language gives the audience room to invent their own story within the broader narrative. The more visual you get, the less room there is for an audience to participate in a funny kind of way. The more you hide, the more the audience can kind of enter into the space of the narrative and kind of participate. And oral storytelling gives you a lot of room to kind of travel with the narrator and kind of migrate in your mind from space to space. Or as Shakespeare says, to see the proud hooves of the horse, as he talks in Henry V. Think when we speak of horses that you see them printing their proud hooves in the receiving earth, and then you're like, whoa, I do see that, but everybody sees it a little differently. You know what I mean?
That's absolutely true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because everybody has their own picture that they're projecting in their mind.
Yeah, which is super cool.
Man, well, first off, I want to say, congratulations with Distant Tales. I really enjoyed the film when I watched it, and
great.
When I first saw it and stuff, I was kind of going through and I was reading the press release for it, and it just it interested me so much because I was like, oh, this is kind of like like a COVID set, COVID filmed. I was like, oh, this is just so interesting. And so and then when I watched it with the stories, it was so fascinating, and I really had a good time with it. And so it's like, what was kind of the genesis of the idea, so to speak, of that got you started on the script?
It was funny because, like you said, I'm a playwright. So I was like, okay, the pandemic hits. Nobody knows what the hell is going on. We were about to shoot a short film, and we were going to shoot that Sunday. And Tom Schulman, the executive producer on our film, who wrote Dead Poet Society, he was like, I'm just turning on a light. He was like, he was like, oh, wait, I think there's like a pandemic happening or something. I think we can't shoot. So we were like, okay, well, then the next thing, the whole world shut down, and it was totally dead silent. There was even a video, I don't know if you remember, like somebody skateboarding down the 101 freeway or something. No cars out, there was nothing out. And almost immediately, I wrote like a short play for a couple of friends of mine. And I was like, let's just do this. I just woke up, I woke up in the morning and I wrote this short play, which is the second piece of the anthology called Please Log On. And I said, let's just do it. I wrote it for you guys. I wasn't really thinking about anything. And we read it, I texted it to them. We read it over Zoom and they were like, we should film this. So then I had my son with me and I was like, okay, well, let's come up with like a cool way to shoot this. We're going to shoot it on Zoom, but we're also I'm going to have another 4K camera that's creating a frame so that it gets messier and messier and more screwed up as you're going into the storytelling. It just kept getting weirder and weirder because now you're filming Zoom. And I knew that I just wanted a lot of material around it. And Zoom has so much funny artifacting and all this kind of stuff and jumping around and skipping. And so we finished that first one, and it was a complete bear to cut, edit, and do everything because I have a great editor I've worked with on 4 or 5 films, Steve Mark, who he did Millennium and X-Files. He did the X-Files movie. He did Deadwood. He did Queen Sugar. He's done a million things, and he was like, wow, this was really hard to cut because we had so many different our slating was all screwed up and we had multiple tracks of sound from multiple sources and it was just a bear and my son was like, this looks terrible. That we can't make the whole movie because then I woke up the next then I hate doing short films because I feel like there's no market for them, there's no way to get them out, whereas with this is, I guess, been described as a horror anthology by some people, or an anthology film, or a drama anthology, or a thriller anthology, depending on how you look at it. Interconnected or lightly connected or thematically connected. I think mostly thematically connected. And we didn't really know what it was. And I also didn't know if you could tell a movie where almost every shot is down the barrel with the camera, with the actor looking directly at the audience. So I was like, this is got a lot of interesting challenges narratively. So anyway, I was like, okay, well, let's do another one. And I wrote another one for another couple of friends and another one for more friends, and another one for more friends. And my son and I decided it can't all look that bad. So we started going from house to house of different actors in the middle of the pandemic. So we would show up at Megan Gallagher's house with our tiny crew of like my son, myself, our Tony Minas, who did the lights and also the set design and also helped with the visual palette, and we did and we had our sound guy and our boom operator, or it might be even sound and boom were the same, and then our hair and makeup was remote, and sometimes we'd bring another actor with us and sometimes we wouldn't. So it was like a tiny European style crew. And we would go from house to house, and each actor did their side, and then the next day we would do the next side in the scene. So it was even shot in a slightly disconcerting way, in the sense that, like, normally in a movie you would do, if we were having this conversation, we'd have the camera on me, then I'd turn around, it'd be on you, and we would do the scene in the same day, so we would be in the same headspace, sort of. This kind of I rehearsed it quite a bit with the actors and developed the text with them. But what's kind of cool is that in the actual shooting, I'd be like doing my side, and then tomorrow you'd be reacting. So it kind of creates like a weird, like, I've come to the conclusion after below these many years that the more weird circumstances you can put into a film, the messier you can make it, the more interesting it gets, because the story is the story.
Mhm.
And I think people sort of watch movies and stories not so much for they do watch for the story, but they also watch for the, I don't want to say flaws in the story, but they watch for the kind
Mhm.
of, the things that make the story unique, which
Mhm.
are like the things that we don't necessarily, the unplanned moments or the complications that people undergo, or like if you ever see like the old Godzilla movies, there's always like a sense of like, I remember what movie I was seeing the other day. It was a Hollywood musical, and the guy's hat fell off in the middle of the dance number. And in American in Paris, Gene Kelly's hat falls off at
Mhm.
the end of a very long take in a routine. And obviously, some editor decided, his hat fell off,
Mhm.
but the whole dance number was great. So we'll leave it with the hat falling off. And then people think, wasn't that cool that the hat fell off? Like, what a genius move. But actually, no, it was a mistake.
Uh-huh.
So I kind of like that. Like people, that goes into what we were talking about earlier about how with storytelling, the audience reads into mistakes
Mhm.
and they think they're intentional.
Mhm.
And that's fantastic.
Mhm.
It gives you a little bit of fluidity in the filmmaking.
It's very true, because I'm reminded. I think it was the scene in Top Gun Maverick. I think when Tom Cruise and Jennifer Connelly are on the boat, and like he stumbles and he kind of falls, and like you can tell she kind of breaks character for saying, he was like, "Oh, are you all right?" But it added to the scene, and it ended up
Yeah.
making it so much better.
Mhm, mhm.
Having this moment, and they kept it in, and so it was great.
Yeah,
But
I feel like you almost look for these happy accidents when
Mhm.
you're cutting together a movie. You're like,
Mhm.
oh, this is human, or this is
Mhm.
authentic, or some of our framing of some of the shots was like off, and then we were like, well, that's kind of cool that it's a little bit off. Like we adjusted it slightly, and you can
Mhm.
zoom things in and adjust them. But if you make everything too perfect,
Mhm.
it just becomes like formulaic.
Mhm. No, that's very true. And because I enjoyed the human aspects, to the story a lot. Like you mentioned the please log on, and and I found it's so fascinating. I loved the aspect that you had between the two people, during the interview, that you had, the interviewer who, was basically kind of going stir crazy by herself. And then, the guy applying for the job was like, I'd give anything to be by myself for a while. And I was laughing because I thought I was able to relate to that so much during the pandemic, because that was kind of the way it was with me. Was like, I was kind of enjoying being by myself, working remote, doing all this. But then I had like my boss, was stuck in an apartment. He had, 3 kids, and everything. And he was missing the office very much, and so it's like,
It's so, yeah, it is funny with with this movie. I found so many interesting things. Like I didn't expect, like for one thing, people respond to different pieces. I guess
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
the pandemic hit them in different ways. Like I
Mhm.
was talking to one guy who was interviewing me about this, and he was like, "Yeah," he goes, "the one about the placebo, about the vaccine, really hit him because he said that his mother-in-law had passed away like a week before
Mhm.
the vaccines came to be,
Mhm.
and it just like hit him very profoundly, because it's
Mhm.
sort of like I realized that we don't have a lot of record of what went down.
It's true. Mhm.
This movie is almost like a weird artifact because it was
Mhm.
so in the middle of it. It was
Mhm.
not in reflection. It wasn't like, let me look back on it. It was
Mhm.
happening. So
Mhm.
so it's like almost like journalistic in a weird way,
Mhm.
or like a journal or something.
Mhm.
So yeah, it
No.
hits people in different ones hit different people depending on where their headspace
Uh-huh.
was.
No, it's very true. Yeah, because I did appreciate a lot of the shots and everything of, showing the, just empty streets and everything. And it like kind of took me back. Or I was like, oh man, I remember, how this was. And yeah, it was fascinating, and one thing too, I really liked, because it was something that I hadn't actually thought about either, was in the placebo episode, how, we had the interactions, with the two characters talking about, the Black Lives Matter and everything. And I really liked the interactions between the two of them, how you had, that she was coming from this perspective of kind of, almost always being in the fight type of a attitude. And then he was kind of like, oh, well, this isn't my thing, you know, is like, I've only been here a few years. This doesn't matter to me, you know, and then kind of seeing his, you know, his evolution of the episode. I found it very interesting because I'd never really seen that perspective before. And so how did you come about? Like,
that was all came about because it's crazy when you think of those 2 or 3 years that we went through, because our neighborhood completely burned down in the Black Lives Matter protests.
Wow.
And we were walking by like a Bed Bath and Beyond or something, and some you know, that pillow story was about somebody taking pillows. And then that same day I was passing somebody and I said, what's going on, you know, and the guy goes, Black Lives Matter. And he was a black guy, and he goes, I don't give a shit about Black Lives Matter. And I thought, wow, that just blew my mind that a black person would say that. And that's when I was like, oh, wow, this is really kind of interesting. There's more under the headline than just simply, you know, yes, it's about, there was a lot. And that piece was actually really fun to explore. Amin Igbenosin and Carolyn Michelle Smith and I worked pretty hard on the text to make it as authentic, as true to their voices as possible, if that makes sense. You know,
no,
like for example, like, you know, Carolyn, the Jamaican and you know, she's from Jamaica or Jamaica, I think, or Trinidad. And yeah, she's from Trinidad, and he is from I'm blanking on the country in Africa, and so we really incorporated their own, Nigeria, and we really incorporated their personal narratives into those two characters, and it was one of the best writing experiences I've had, because so many people resist giving their actors voice, you know, as beyond just as actors, you know. So I kind of have a lot of feeling of respect for actors, that if they're giving you a note as a writer, you should really listen carefully, or as a director, you should understand that they're helping you to make it as good as possible. And in that case, it was really the case that those two actors gave so generously and did such a beautiful job with the material. And I mean, even little things like how Carolyn says push, and that's an expression that comes from Trinidad, and he recognizes it because he hears it in her voice. And it's like it's just a cool way of just using verbal cues that I, as a writer, as a white writer, coming from my background as a, you know, as a Jew from Eastern Europe, you know, immigrated to America, I just wouldn't know that stuff, you know. So it was so enriching. And then Chantal and Chaco was sort of assisted me in directing that particular piece, and I think it you know, it really benefited from really being as inclusive as possible and having that really cool process that we had. It was really fun. Really enriching.
That's very cool. And you know, I definitely agree with you. I think like having your actors have a voice, you know, in the character and the writing, it does enrich it. It does help, you know, because you definitely did really feel those characters, you know, their struggles, their backgrounds, you know, they really did come to life in that. So
yeah, you know, like I worked on a project with Dustin Hoffman, and he was telling me about working on Rain Man, and working with Zemeckis, and he said that, you know, he couldn't get Raymond's, he couldn't figure out like a character of Rain Man, and he couldn't figure out why he wasn't landing it as an actor, and then and he just kept improvising with Tom Cruise, and finally he realized that it was because Rain Man never looked at the character, and he always needed to look at the actor. He always acted off of the other actor, and so whenever he would go out of character, they came up with a verbal tick, and I can't remember the tick from the movie, but he goes, you know, okay, or whatever it is. And that's him getting back in character. That's what they found between them. And he wound up winning an Oscar. So it really does pay to listen to actors, to hear what actors are telling you. If it's not hitting them, if they don't understand it, or if a line isn't working for them, or a moment where they're doing something and they're not understanding it, then you need to be, as a writer, you need to be open, and you go, oh, okay. So that's what I try to do, is I try to really give the actors the agency to speak and feel like they have ownership of their, not just of their role, but of the project, to the degree that they want it. Some actors just want to come in and just read their lines and and perform it, and they do it all on their side, and they're not asking for anything from you. But other actors really want to participate, and if you can open that door where they feel like, oh yeah, I'm welcome, my voice is welcome in this process, then I think you get tremendous dividends.
No, definitely. Yeah, I agree. And that's a fascinating insight. Oh,
yeah. Same with the first one, with Tiffany Wolf, where, she has to do some crazy stuff in that. And, and I knew she was a dancer, and I was like, okay, you choreograph this, how you feel, and we talked about how the narrative would go, because that's about domestic abuse kind of, and about all the people that are trapped in abusive domestic situations within their houses and can't leave, which is kind of like amazing. And so it was sort of like, okay, well, we could, I don't want to give any spoilers, but we could, do it one way, or we could do it another way. And we both agreed that doing this other way would be a more fun choice for her to play as an actor. And, and so that's what I mean by collaborating with the actors. They can even be part of the storytelling part of the narrative, depending on, how comfortable you are with that.
No, that's very true. And yeah, definitely without giving any spoilers away, I'll try and frame this question. So if anybody hasn't seen it, they won't, the ending won't be ruined of that particular episode. But I did want to ask, I noticed like very interesting on her character, the framing of kind of the filming of it, was her front and center with kind of that, the pure blackness kind of behind her. And that was different, for obviously, the other character who she's interacting with. And so I was wondering, like, was that a filmmaking choice for the twist ending to mirror that a little bit, or
very much, like that was part of like the whole idea of like, it's a 4 a.m. affair. It's an affair that starts before the pandemic and continues at 4 a.m. on Zoom. If you've ever gone on Zoom at night, then depending on whether there's any ambient background light, your background will be lit. But if you're in the middle of anywhere, and that's one of the funny things about this piece, is you never quite know where you are. Like I'm looking at you right now, your background is blurred. I don't really know where you are.
Yeah.
Or my background could be fake. You kind of, and you don't know if there's a dead body right to the right of you or the left of you. You just don't know. There could be, people curate. I think of it from a dramatic perspective of like, subtext. Subtext is like what you don't say, but what people can infer from the way you say it. And so this is a piece where the subtext becomes a visual metaphor, because the frame is the text, and the subtext is everything outside the frame. And because it's Zoom, you literally, we do break the frame every now and again to show you the inside of people's houses, or sometimes to frame things. And as I progressed in the movie, I tried to break the frame more and more. So, as you're trying to get more and more towards reality. But the idea being that initially you're like, you're just locked within the frame, and the first one is most locked within the frame. So the first one only goes out of the frame, I think, one time in the entire piece, except for the interstitial stuff where we cut away. But basically you're always in the frame, so you actually don't know what's around these characters. It's the subtext very strongly. And so we're left to infer what the subtext is. And when we listen to a text, we're like, oh, I know who that guy is. But what you don't know is, hey, his mom just died, or hey, he just you know, killed somebody, or hey, he just you know, he's a secret drinker, or you know, you don't know what you're dealing with people a lot of times. So anyway, the blackness that's around her, the darkness, is a bit of a metaphor. But it's also, if you've ever been on Zoom late at night and are lit only by the computer screen, you know, I did some screen tests on this, and you 100% will only see black.
That's true.
You're really unmoored. In his case, you know, because he was in a more domestic setting, you know, you had a little more stuff around, like he's hiding in the bathroom and he has the light on, and or you know, certain things happen and a light clicks on, and then he's exposed and things like that. So yeah, it became a metaphor. I mean, it became a visual metaphor for the subtext. And to me, in filmmaking, it's always about limitations. You know, like I worked on a project with Nina Jacobson, who used to run Disney, and now she's the exec producer of the Hunger Games and all this stuff.
Oh, okay.
Producer. And we were talking about love stories, and she said, well, love stories are the hardest to write because, you know, obviously two people meet, they like each other, they fall in love. So, you know, where's the drama? So you have to create the obstacle, you know, in Romeo and Juliet, they're from different families, you know, or on different coasts, or one's already getting married, or blah, 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 or they hate each other, but they really love each other. You know, there's a million ways, but it's very hard to create plausible obstacles. And so if you look at limitations as basically the heart of storytelling, you know, because it's out of what comes conflict, it may never be possible to write another, to create another movie with this particular limitation of Zoom and the frame, you know, because why would you? You know? So that's what's kind of fun about it. Is like, oh wow, you know, this by adopting this particular limitation, it's actually creating like a diary of a time when we all live within this limitation and sort of accepted it as like a natural. And then it also became kind of a transition point for us, because like my daughter now, she's all on Zoom. People are working remotely. Society has just deemed to make, you know, the public commons into a digital commons. That's part probably of how our Ubermensches in the corporate world are kind of monetizing our space. So public space. So I kind of think, you know, this is also sort of a goodbye to the last breath of humanness. You know, that was, you know, we were human before the pandemic, and now we're somewhat, you know, now we're fodder for AI kind of.
It's very, very true. You know, it's I never really thought of it like that, but that is very accurate. You know, of like pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and how much everything did change. And, you know, a lot of that social interaction and that kind of the humanness of social interaction did go away in many ways. You know, you even see just with like theater attendance, you know, it's coming back now, but it's way less than it was, you know, in 2019.
Theater is a disaster. I mean, if you had told me 3 years ago that the Center Theater Group would close the Tabor, you know, which is our big institutional theater in this area, that it would close down. I mean, nobody would believe that. Yeah, I mean, and yet, you know, you could see the weakness of the social space. The social space has been weakening through social media and other things. It's been migrating into a digital space, and weakening institutions like press and things like that. But the pandemic really accelerated that trend, and sort of was a before. I mean, I could. It's probably a bit hyperbolic, but maybe not, to say that there was like a BC and BC and AZ, you know, before COVID and after COVID. It's on a weird way, everything is sort of the same, but in a weird way, everything is sort of quite different.
No, it's very, very accurate, you know, and I feel like it has affected everybody's lives in some way. And, you know, some people might say some of it was for better, but others, you know, I think generally a lot of it was for worse, honestly, you know. I don't know,
I
but
mean,
we'll
I think
see,
that's
you
like
know.
a matter of, I think you know, social media enables a person like George Santos
Mhm.
to suddenly, you know,
Mhm.
to kind of become a political figure
Mhm.
and to make it all the way to the House of Representatives,
Mhm.
and also to monetize
Uh-huh.
being the first person kicked out of the House of
Yeah.
Representatives.
I
You know,
I saw he's
since
what on
the Civil
Cameo
War or
now.
something. I mean, you know, so I mean, it's definitely created opportunities for
Mhm.
certain people. Um, yeah, it's
Mhm.
created opportunities, and obviously, it created the opportunity for this particular movie to be made.
Mhm. No, that's very true. Yeah, it wouldn't have been made in this form, you know, without
Yeah,
COVID.
who would it wouldn't occur to somebody to try to tell
Mhm.
a story in this way, or four
Mhm.
stories.
Oh, no, that's true, you know, and, you know, with two of the stories, one thing that also I wanted to ask you about was, I noticed that with Please Log On and with the last story, Are Not, I noticed that kind of both episodes kind of had this idea of like a shadowy person kind of pulling the strings, you know, behind, you know, kind of the man behind the curtain type thing. And so I wanted to ask, you know, is like, you know, was that intentional of having those two particular episodes? Like, was there any sort of, you know, narrative thread between those, or was it supposed to be two completely separate things?
No, I think that I made the last piece, Are Not, which is about a grieving father who
Mhm.
can't really face his wife's suicide, and turns instead to like
Mhm.
the dark web to kind of channel his emotional feelings, which he was never really taught to deal with. Doesn't really have a language of emotion,
Mhm.
and finds, maybe he's an example of one of these people that may feel empowered by
Mhm.
moving into a digital space, because a social space does challenge us in certain
Mhm.
ways, you know. And some people are more comfortable with the challenge, and some people, when they rise to meet the challenge,
Mhm.
find themselves healed a little bit, you know, like,
Mhm.
oh, I went to a support group, and now that I went to the support group, I met a bunch of people who are going through a similar thing, and now
Mhm.
I can talk about it with my son and my relatives and the people who are closest to me without feeling shame or feeling like
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
failed as a man, you know, all
Mhm.
these kinds of things. But for other people, it may be more comfortable for them never to have that,
Mm. Mhm.
you know, and simply uh, take their anger
Mhm.
and focus it on some external enemy,
Mm.
uh,
Mhm.
and not really confront. So he's not really dealing with the fact that he's not there as a dad for his son.
Mm.
He's
Mhm.
he's only there, you know, he's there as an avenger of wrong, which
Mm.
is quite a
Mhm.
different thing from being a dad. You know,
Uh-huh.
like, your
Yeah.
kid doesn't care if you're a
Uh-huh.
social avenger. Your kid cares if you take him to a baseball game.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
like,
true.
dad's out fighting crime, and you know, so I think it's a touching scene, you know, on the phone with his
Mhm.
son, where his dad's like, oh, you know, the kid's like, oh, you're fighting a secret mission. And the
Mm.
dad's
Uh-huh.
like, yeah, yeah, and he's like, stands there very proudly, you know, giving his video manifesto, uh
Mhm.
and then, you know, we talked about those people that exploit, uh
Mm.
you
Mhm.
know, that feeling, you know, they fill the space. The
Mhm.
social space is gone, and now they're going to fill the need. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of people out there now selling alternatives to vaccines,
Mhm.
or you know, alternatives to social engagement. Go get a gun and go do something, you know, or and so I think he's exploiting this guy,
Mhm.
obviously. And there's a twist to that too. Like, we were pretty conscious of trying to make each story
Mhm.
have a kind of twist at the end, so
Mhm.
that they were of a piece, you know, that you know, going back to this idea of subtext, what you saw, what you
Mhm.
don't see, the twist really is like a bit of the revelation of subtext. So you're
Mhm.
watching something, you're reading into something, you think you're watching one thing, You're really watching something else.
Mm.
And then, you know, once I started to, this movie was a bit of a journey of discovery, because, you know, I started with this one short piece, and then as it grew, I kind of like, okay, what's thematically linking this? What's the mise en scène of this? Like, what's the journey of this? And yeah, each piece deals with isolation, deals with the migration of the social to the digital, and each piece deals, and then each piece is kind of a thriller, and each piece kind of has a twist. So I was like looking for those things that would unify the piece, bring it into the same sphere. And some of it I found in editing, and, you know, we found as we did screenings in my backyard, you know, socially distanced screenings. And it was like, okay, tell me what you just saw. And then I would hear what the people would say, and then I would maybe just shape it a little in the direction of what they had said, or I would, you know, and that's sort of how we found the piece, because we didn't really know going in what exactly we were going to come out with.
No, that's very true, you know. And, you know, because I did notice, you know, obviously for our listeners, not spoiling anything, but like, you know, I did notice kind of, you know, that some of the stories, you know, end on a little bit of a darker, you know, or more, you know, a darker, more mysterious, you know, ending. You know, what led you to select the final story, and I won't tell people what the final story is so that they're surprised, to kind of end on a bit of a, like, have it almost like a happy ending, kind of, you know.
Yeah, because I felt like you had to end with somebody rejecting all this. Like, you know, you have to end with a human being that says, you know, I'm not going to indulge in this anymore. I'm not going to just accept this. Like, I think it's important, if you're taking people through this journey, to give them the option of like opting out. Some people, you know, there's been a lot of discussion now about interesting discussion, I think, about AI and about some of the new technologies, and some interesting thinkers now are basically saying, hey, you know, you don't have to adopt a new technology just because it exists. Sometimes you can say no. You know, this is not a good technology. This is not going to help things get better, or it's not going to improve our lives in a measurable way. And rejection of a technology has to be an option. You know,
No,
if we don't, you know, there's other people that say, hey, every new technology is always adopted, has to be adopted, because that's what human beings do. You know, if they find a tool, they pick it up and they use it. They have no free will. They just use whatever. They have to invent, and they have to use what they invent, because that's what people do. And I guess I don't know if they're right or wrong, but I challenge that assumption, or the last piece challenges that and sort of says, you know, no, I do actually have a choice. I actually have agency. I'm a human being, and I can also. So, you know, the whole idea of free will for human beings is like a kind of a bit of an open question these days. Like, you know, there was a book that came out recently about where a person basically advanced further their theory that there is no such thing as free will. And so I suppose, you know, I don't know how deeply these themes are embedded in the movie, like about free will or lack of free will, but certainly ending on a hopeful note means that, you know, a human being can choose a different path for themselves if they I think making the movie is a bit of an affirmation. Like, there's sort of, you know, you could not make the movie, and then you would be, and you could make another, you know, you said maybe we'll talk about Hallmark or whatever, and you could make another Hallmark movie, you know, which they have a formula, you know, and I love Hallmark movies, but they definitely have like, they're definitely going to always kind of begin and end the same way, and they're challenging in their own way, really challenging and fun to write, but to you know, to affirm something out of the box, you know, that isn't you know, you don't exactly know what it is when you're going into it, and you don't know how it's going to end. That's an affirmative process, you know. Because you could certainly say, well, it's the pandemic and I can't be creative, and I'm just gonna, like, or that you can accept that the world just tells you how to be 100%, or you could be like, oh, I guess I can be whatever I choose to be. Get on a bike tomorrow and ride around the world if I want. Who's going to stop me in the end of the day? Except for myself.
No, that's very, very true. Because I think we do have that a lot in society, where that idea that people will say of people being trapped with no choice, or oh, you have to go down this route or that route, and I think it can be very easy for people to fall into that idea of not making the correct choice or the right choice for themselves. And so I think that's a very fascinating idea to explore.
There's a lot of there's, I guess, some fear or trepidation of like, oh, if I do this, somehow other opportunities are going to close for me, or I'll mark myself. But I think that those are largely illusory.
Yeah.
Or your parents' voice. Please don't do that. Don't touch that hot stove. Because you will burn yourself.
Yeah.
How do you know the stove is hot? Like
that's very true. Yes, it happened to me as a kid. It's like with Distant Tales, what do you hope as the creator of this piece that people will leave with after they've finished watching it?
It's funny that I guess as like I've done many movies and plays, probably like 40, and I never asked that question. And the reason I don't ask it is because I guess I feel like I want people to be engaged. I want them to like lean forward into the experience and take from it, like you said, oh, that particular, like one particular piece really spoke to you because of your boss. And so I guess you want people to feel like they see themselves in it a little bit, but you also want them to feel I don't want to say, you want to like try to open up a little bit of a door for them, and I guess give them permission to think about things in a slightly different way. And I guess the difference between a news article, for example, or an opinion piece and a play or a movie is the emotional component, I guess, is you want people to, although, in articles, you can feel quite a strong emotion. So I don't really have a pat answer to that. I guess mainly I feel like I want people to not to be bored. That's a terrible aspiration, but it's the true one. You don't want people. I can't stand it like when you're like you get to the point in a movie where you're like, oh, okay, I know exactly how this movie is going to end, and now I'm just going to sit here and wait for it to end. Like I felt that way. I liked a lot of the new Godzilla, but I felt at a certain point like, okay, obviously they're going to defeat this creature. And now I've got about 40 minutes of sitting here, and I'm sort of wading through the emotional beats, which I don't necessarily feel all that earned. So I think you want to keep the audience guessing as to where you're going with it. You want to keep them engaged to the very end. And the hopeful thing with any piece, I think, is the real quintessence of art, I suppose, is in that notion of the epiphany, which is a slightly religious term, but it means that, at the end of a piece, and this has 4 pieces, that you feel like an epiphanous feeling. So I don't think that these pieces necessarily accomplish that, or maybe one does for one person, or but you want to feel like oh, when you have an epiphany, you have a profound insight or a profound sense of feeling, and it sticks with you, as opposed to like a lot of movies are easily forgotten. Like I could watch. It's funny. I get these screeners, and they're all the celebrated movies, and then 3 or 4 years later, I look back at them. I never want to see any of them again. and I don't remember them. Like, what was that one was about? The guy who went here and and you're like, so I guess for me, I mean, my aspiration is just to create something that enters into the zeitgeist in a way that, and it like Die Hard is one of those movies that it's just like, it's just perennial. It's just a great movie. I don't know that it achieved an epiphany either, but you do feel this profound sense of satisfaction every time you watch it, because I can't explain it. But then but then it's true also of Pickpocket by Bresson, and it's true of A Thousand Blows by Truffaut, and it's true of the great movies too. It's true of The Godfather. So I just want people to accept this movie on its own terms and to feel like it's a little part of their life. Like they didn't waste an hour and 40 minutes watching it. Like that it was time well spent. That would be my aspiration. That was time well spent. I didn't think that. And I remember it. Like a year later, I remember that little movie.
It's true. Having when you remember something or keep thinking about it, that's always a sign that that's something achieved, at least a portion of what it was setting out to do, because I know, like, after I watched Distant Tales and stuff, that it was like 2 days later, so I found my thoughts kind of drifting back to several of the different of the different scenes, and I remember, because I get a lot of screeners, I watch a lot of different stuff, and most of them I don't think about too much after I've seen it, it's like, and but this one I was going back, I was going back to it, for about a week or so after watching it. I kept thinking about
it. So it had a little glow, it survived. It's like you build sandcastles on the side of the sand, and some of them last a little longer, and some of them get washed away faster.
No, it's absolutely true. I told a couple of my critic friends, I was like, "Oh, you should check out Distant Tales." I said, it's such a fascinating, and I told them, it's such a fascinating movie, and I mentioned exactly what you said, the snapshot, of the pandemic being filmed in that, and I said, you won't see anything quite like it, because I said in a positive way too, and so it just is fascinating, so I think I would say well done, I think you did a good job.
Thanks.
So and where can people who are listening get their hands on it or watch it?
They can rent it, they could get it on Blu-ray. It's actually out on Blu-ray with a beautiful box art by a buddy of mine, Dan Benesh, who does a lot of poster art. That's also a lot of fun for you independent filmmakers out there, that the poster art and stuff like that, key art. It's a neglected part of movie making that's really actually a lot of fun to work on with it, to really think visually, how do I represent this, how do I summarize this in just a couple of images. So it's out on Blu-ray, it's out on Amazon, iTunes, it'll be on Google Play soon. It's on Spectrum. That's it.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, definitely, everybody, go check it out. It's worth your time. And I think there's definitely a lot of surprises in it, a lot of twists, and you'll have a good time with it. So,